Dax Walker was just trying to fix a ship when an alien warrior walked into his life and demanded his hand in marriage. "What do I have to do to wed you, human?" she asked, armor glowing with lethal intent. The bar fell silent. This wasn't a proposal. It was a declaration of war on his quiet life. Port Osiris Station was the kind of place where mechanics like Dax Walker could disappear into the machinery. His life ran on a simple rhythm. Wake up, inhale the sharp tang of engine coolant, work on ships until his hands turned black with grime, then unwind at the rusted wrench with what passed for friends in the outer colonies. The bar smelled like old lubricant and recycled oxygen, the kind of place where you wiped your hands on your pants before shaking someone's hand. Dax had been recalibrating a thruster array when the bar's ambient chatter cut off mid-sentence. His knuckle was bleeding where he'd scraped it on a coolant line. Across the cramped workshop space, the wrench's regulars had gone still as corpses. Even Old Man Reisner stopped mid-pour behind the bar, synth whiskey overflowing onto the counter like an omen. You could always tell when an Ascari entered a room. Something in the air changed like the hum before an electrical storm. Their armor made a distinctive sound too. Not the clank of human-made plating, but a low-frequency vibration that made your back teeth ache. The Ascari warrior standing in the doorway was tall enough that she had to duck under the wrench's ancient doorframe. Her helmet retracted with a hiss. "Mechanic," she said, not asking. Dax's co-worker Tarn elbowed him hard enough to bruise. "Think she means you, grease monkey." Psych studies on deep space habitats show that humans rely on rigid routines as a coping mechanism in lawless environments. The 18-hour work shift, the same meal at the same counter every night, the familiar faces at the bar, it all creates an illusion of control where none exists. Dax had been clinging to his routine like a lifeline for 3 straight years. The Ascari warrior's armor pulsed with unfamiliar glyphs as she crossed the room. Her boots left temporary dents in the floor plating that smoothed themselves out seconds later. Some kind of nano-adaptive tech. The regulars parted like water around her. Up close, she smelled like ozone and something floral. "You are Dax Walker of Terrasol." Not a question. Dax wiped his greasy hands on a rag that hadn't been clean in weeks. "Depends who's asking." The warrior's expression didn't change. Her pupils were vertical slits like a cat's, tracking his every movement. When she moved, it was with the terrifying precision of someone who knew exactly how much force each action required. She removed a gauntlet and pressed bare fingertips to his workstation. The metal surface rippled where she touched it. "I am Sashara of the Thousand Voids," she said, "and I have need of a mate." Somewhere behind them, a glass shattered on the floor. Tarn made a sound like a choked laugh. The bar's tension could have powered a fusion reactor. Dax's brain supplied several responses, all of them disastrous. He settled for, "You might be in the wrong port, lady. This is a repair dock, not a dating service." Sashara's answering smile showed just a bit too much teeth. "Your genetic compatibility scores are optimal. Your survival of 12 pirate raids demonstrates resilience, and your workshop records show attention to detail." She tilted her head. "I will have you." Studies on interspecies attraction indicate that cultural misunderstandings escalate fastest when one party treats courtship as transactional and the other as romantic. Dax wasn't sure whether to laugh, run, or check his life insurance policy. The Ascari female waiting for his response looked about as romantic as a plasma torch. Tarn broke first. "She's serious," he wheezed. "Oh, stars, she's dead serious." "You're joking," Dax said, hoping desperately that she was. His toolbox suddenly seemed like an excellent defensive weapon. Sashara didn't blink. "Among my people, worthy mates are earned, not asked for." She reactivated her gauntlet with a snap of her wrist. "I will complete the courtship trials to prove my worth." A pause. "You will witness them." The rusted wrench had seen its share of bizarre encounters. Drunks claiming to be lost royalty. Bounty hunters tracking marks through the bathrooms. That one time, a smuggler tried to sell a crate of allegedly extinct turtles. But this was new. Dax could practically hear the betting pool forming behind his back. His tools clattered as he backed into his workstation. Sashara matched his movement forward, maintaining exact distance like a ship locked in formation. The scent of ozone grew stronger. "I don't even know you," Dax said. Sashara's armor flickered with those strange symbols again, a language that moved. "You will," she promised. Then she turned and walked out, leaving the entire bar holding its breath. The door slid shut behind her with a depressurizing sigh. 12 seconds later, the room exploded into chaotic chatter. Tarn gripped Dax's shoulder hard enough to hurt. "Congratulations," he said, voice shaking with barely contained laughter. "I think you just got engaged to the scariest woman in 3 systems." Dax stared at the door where Sashara had disappeared. His routine had just been vaporized. His hands were still covered in engine grease. His sandwich was going cold, and somewhere out there, an alien warrior was preparing who knew what kind of deadly trials to win him. The Rusted Wrench's regulars suddenly looked at him like he was either a dead man walking or the luckiest bastard alive. Neither option seemed particularly comforting. Dax barely had time to wipe the engine grease from his hands before Sashara made her intentions painfully clear. The Askari warrior stood in the center of the Rusted Wrench, her armor emitting a low hum that made the glassware vibrate. Every patron within 20 meters had stopped breathing. "What do I have to do to marry you, human?" Sashara asked, as casually as someone might inquire about the weather. Her voice carried across the silent bar like a ship-wide alert. Dax's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a sharp ceramic crack. Tarn, seated beside him, choked on his synth beer. The bartender slowly set down the glass he'd been polishing. Like any sudden movement might trigger an interstellar incident. Human courtship rituals typically involve gradual escalation. Casual dates, gifts, whispered sweet nothings. Askari customs, as Dax was rapidly learning, skipped straight to overwhelming force. The glowing sigils along Sashara's pauldrons pulsed with an eerie blue light, forming intricate patterns that shifted like living constellations. Up close, he could see minute circuitry woven into the metal, reacting to her vocal inflections. "You're joking," Dax said, hoping to whatever gods might be listening that she was. Sashara tilted her head slightly, the motion eerily precise. "My people do not joke about pair bonding." She tapped the center of her chest plate, causing the glyphs to flare brighter. "This is a courtship display. These markings denote my lineage, combat honors, and genetic compatibility scores with your profile." Behind them, someone muttered, "She's serious." Holy hell, she's actually serious. Anthropological studies across 27 known sentient species show that approaches to marriage proposals break down into 3 categories: mutually negotiated, predator-style ultimatums, and what researchers clinically call competitive acquisition. The Askari fell squarely into the last group, with a side order of lethal trial by combat. Sashara hadn't asked if he was interested. She'd announced her intention to win him. "You can't just..." Dax gestured vaguely between them, fingers still streaked with hydraulic fluid. "People don't do this. Your species' courtship methods are inefficient," Sashara said. "You waste months on trivial displays. I watched human mating rituals for 3 solar cycles before choosing you. The process is irrational." A glass shattered somewhere in the back. The Rusted Wrench had seen bar fights, smuggling deals gone bad. Even that one time a smuggler's exotic pet got loose in the vents. But this was new territory. Tarn recovered first, slapping Dax's shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise. "Looks like you've got an admirer, mechanic." A scary, heavily armed admirer. The Askari's armor emitted a sudden pulse of light, glyphs rearranging into what might have been a family crest, or a warning label. Sashara took a single step forward and half the bar flinched. The floor plating groaned under her weight. Nano-adaptive boots automatically adjusting to distribute the load. Dax held up his grease-blackened hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture for, "Please don't murder me." "I don't even know you." Sashara's helmet retracted with a hydraulic hiss, revealing sharp features and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim bar light. She smelled like ozone and something earthy, with undertones of advanced polymers. "You will," she promised. Then she laid out the terms. Among the Askari, worthy mates weren't asked for. They were earned through trials. Sashara would complete 3 tasks to prove her suitability. Dax would witness each one. There would be no discussion, no negotiation. The declaration came with all the flexibility of a docking clamp sealing to an airlock. The first trial involved stealing a warlord's personal flagship. "You're insane," Dax blurted. The warlord in question had a reputation for spacing traitors out an airlock feet first. Sashara didn't blink. The second requires taming a void beast. Someone in the crowd made a sign against evil. Void beasts were semi-mythological predators that haunted the edges of known space, creatures that supposedly phased between dimensions when hungry. The third? Sashara continued as calmly as if listing grocery. Dax's protest died in his throat when Sashara projected the schematics of the warlord's flagship. The holodisplay shimmered above the rusted wrench's bar counter, rotating to show automated turret placements and reinforced bulkheads. Somewhere behind them, a mercenary made the sign against evil. The Iron Maw wasn't just any pirate vessel. It was a floating war crime wrapped in durasteel plating. You want to steal that? Dax pointed at the shimmering projection. His finger shook slightly. The Iron Maw's got enough firepower to glass a small moon. Garrick stations assault teams in every airlock. Sashara flicked a command through her armor interface. The projection zoomed in on a barely visible service hatch near the Maw's lower decks. They replaced 6 exterior plating sections last cycle. The maintenance crews left a blind spot in the new sensor coverage. The bar erupted in nervous laughter. Garrick's the Flayer had earned his name by peeling skin off rivals with monofilament wires, before ejecting them into hard vacuum. His security protocols were legendary, reportedly included retinal scans, DNA locks, and at least 2 living sentries per corridor. Even if you slip past the sentries, Dax said, the Maw's internal defenses will activate after 90 seconds once unauthorized entry registers. Sashara finished. Her armored fingers danced through more projections. Neural mapping suggests we'll require 72 to reach the bridge. Studies on impossible task psychology suggest humans react in predictable stages. Denial. Protest. Then either surrender to panic or dissociative acceptance. Dax skipped straight to phase 3. You're insane, he informed Sashara. The words came out flat. Around them, the Rusted Wrench's patrons divided into 2 camps, those quietly calculating survival odds and those already taking bets. Tarn had started a pool on whether Sashara would make it halfway before getting vaporized. The Askari warrior's armor emitted a pulse of light, glyphs rearranging into tactical readouts. Garrick's is resupplying at the Theta 9 fueling station in 8 hours. They'll be docked for precisely 43 minutes. The projection shifted to show the station's layout. Security peak occurs at mid-docking cycle when shift rotations overlap. Dax glanced at the timer Sashara had activated on his wrist pad. It counted down to her projected infiltration window with unsettling precision. His coffee had gone cold 3 revelations ago. The liquid surface reflected twisted versions of the schematic still hovering overhead. Research on near-impossible feats indicates that successful attempts share common traits: flawless timing, unpredictable approaches, and, crucially, a perpetrator too stubborn or desperate to reconsider. Sashara exuded all 3 qualities like radiation from a damaged reactor. Let me reconstruct your plan, Dax said slowly. You're going to waltz into a secured fueling station, sneak past 24 of the galaxy's most violent mercenaries, crack a warship's security in under 90 seconds, and just fly away? Sashara's answering smile showed slightly too many teeth. You understand perfectly. The projection shifted again, zooming in on Theta 9's underbelly. Sashara had marked a service conduit that, if the outdated station schematics were accurate, ran directly beneath the Maw's docking berth. Neural tremors suggest you're experiencing doubt, she noted, watching Dax's facial muscles twitch. Your limbic system emits distress patterns. No shit, Dax muttered. Biometric studies on human stress responses confirm that typical fight-flight metrics become irrelevant when facing truly absurd scenarios. Dax's adrenal system had moved into uncharted territory, equal parts terror and bewildered disbelief. Across the room, Tarn was winning his argument that Sashara wouldn't last 5 minutes. The bookmaker adjusted odds based on audible groans whenever new schematics appeared. Someone had started a secondary pool on whether Dax would end up spaced alongside her. Sashara closed the projections with a flick of her wrist. Her armor's neuroreactive circuits flared blue along the joints. You'll observe from the service tunnel, she informed Dax. Close enough to witness, far enough to avoid security sweeps. Dax opened his mouth to protest. He closed it when Sashara tapped the armor panel covering her left forearm. A compartment hissed open, revealing 5 micro-explosives the size of his thumbnail. For emergencies, she explained, like someone mentioning they'd packed snacks for a long flight. The explosives looked suspiciously like modified mining charges, the kind used to crack asteroid cores. The bar's ambient noise dropped several decibels. Even Tarn stopped calculating odds long enough to gape. Those tiny devices could punch through 3 feet of reinforced bulkhead. Dax suddenly understood why Sashara had asked if he owned flame-retardant coveralls. Right, Dax managed. His voice cracked. Just a casual warship theft. Between friends. Psychology literature agrees that humans facing absurd danger often default to gallows humor as a coping mechanism. Sashara didn't seem to register the joke or chose to ignore it. She set a waypoint on Dax's wristpad with 2 brisk taps. Meet here in 6 hours, she ordered. Then, with unsettling gentleness, wear something fireproof. The Askari warrior turned and strode out before Dax could mount further protests. The rusted wrench's patrons parted like a tide before her, conversation resuming only after the door cycled shut behind her armored form. Tarn whistled low. That woman's either the bravest thing in 3 sectors or completely cracked in the helm. Dax stared at the schematics still burned into his retinas. The Iron Maw's kill count scrolled behind his eyelids every time he blinked. He suddenly regretted every life choice that led to this moment, including that 4th whiskey last cycle that made him miss his shuttle back to civilized space. You realize, he told Tarn slowly, this is basically suicide. Tarn clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to bruise. Look at it this way, if she pulls it off, you're marrying a legend. If she doesn't, well, you won't have to worry about alimony. Studies on interspecies romance rarely cover scenarios involving grand theft starship as courtship ritual. Dax wondered dimly if he'd get a footnote in some future anthropology paper. Human male subject. Expired mid-courtship. See appendix. Warlord encounters. The timer on his wristpad pulsed gently, counting down to potential annihilation. 6 hours until they infiltrated the most guarded vessel in the quadrant. 6 hours until his quiet life officially transformed into something out of a bad action thriller. Dax reached for Tarn's untouched beer. He drained it in one long swallow. Somewhere out in the station's warren of corridors, an alien warrior was preparing to single-handedly steal a flying fortress for him. The absurdity of that thought settled like lead in his gut. Tarn tapped a fresh screen on his betting tablet. Odds just shifted again, he remarked cheerfully. People are putting serious cred on her making it to the bridge before getting caught. Dax glared. I hate you, Tarn grinned. Yeah. Just remember, if this works out, I expect an invitation to the wedding. The timer pulsed again. Dax sighed and went to find those flame-resistant coveralls. Dax stared at the containment cylinder in the docking bay like it held death itself. The industrial-grade steel had claw marks 3 inches deep running down its exterior. The metal bore strange discolorations, too. Patches where the atomic structure seemed to have forgotten whether it should be solid or not. You want to tame what now? Dax's voice cracked. Sashara adjusted the calibration on the cylinder's field generator with the casual ease of someone checking oven temperature. Void beast. Hyper-evolved apex predator, capable of partial quantum state collapse. She tapped the observation screen where thermal imaging showed only swirling distortion. This one frequents the derelict mall's lower levels. The black market hub beneath Port Osiris wasn't the kind of place you went voluntarily. Dax had once seen a splicer try to sell lightly used cybernetic limbs that still twitched in the display case. The occasional missing spacer was considered local color. Let me get this straight. Dax rubbed his temples. Your second marriage trial involves walking into gang territory, finding a creature that physics textbooks say shouldn't exist, and making it your pet? Sashara's armor emitted an amused pulse of light. Yes. Research on apex predators suggests that most intelligent species share an instinctive terror response to things that move wrong. Void beasts reportedly stepped between dimensions when hunting, 1 second there, the next second rearranging your internal organs. The few blurry images in circulation showed things with too many joint angles and eyes that followed you from multiple directions at once. The containment cylinder hummed ominously. Its reinforced viewport revealed only shifting darkness inside, like oil suspended in zero gravity. Every 47 seconds exactly, the entire docking bay lights flickered in sync with something unseen moving inside. This is insane, Dax muttered. Tarn had begged off this particular field trip, claiming sudden religious obligations involving staying very far away. Dax envied that wisdom. His boots felt glued to the deck plating as Sashara initiated the release sequence. Atmospheric alarms began a low whooping sound that did nothing for his already spiking blood pressure. Observation, Sashara said, as her armored fingers flew across the console. Human courtship rituals often involve gift-giving. A void beast is a superior offering to cut flowers or chocolate. The cylinder's locking mechanisms disengaged with a series of hider. The converted cargo bay smelled like burned insulation and stale sweat. Dax clenched the rusted railing as Sashara stepped into the makeshift arena, her armor's usual humming silenced for combat purity. Across the oil-stained deck plating, General Veer cracked his neck with a sound like snapping carbon fiber. His heavier, ornate armor marked him as older generation, bigger, slower, more brutal. Exactly the kind of opponent Sashara shouldn't be fighting barefaced. You challenge Askari law for this? Veer's voice carried across the bay, thick with disdain. He jerked his chin at Dax like someone pointing out a stain. A soft-skinned wrench monkey? Dax winced. The cargo bay's jury-rigged lighting flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows. Around them, 200 spectators jostled for space between crates marked explosive and biocontainment. Someone had opened betting kiosks along the far wall. The odds on Sashara's survival dropped another 3 points when Veer unsheathed his shock blade. Combat settles all, Sashara said simply. The first rule of Askari honor duels. No armor systems, no ranged weapons, just blades and whoever could stay vertical longest. Neurological studies on combat arousal show trained warriors enter a hyper-focused state where time perception distorts. Sashara moved like that now. Every muscle coiled, pupils dilated to black pools. She rolled her shoulders once. The sleeve dagger in her left hand looked absurdly small against Veer's two-handed monstrosity. Veer attacked first. His blade came down like a ship-breaking hammer. Sashara pivoted, letting the shock blade's energy discharge scorch the deck where she'd stood. The smell of superheated metal joined the stench of sweat. Dax's knuckles whitened on the railing. Human eyes couldn't follow the blur of motion that followed, just impressions. Sashara's dagger flashing like a strobe. Veer's heavier blade carving glowing after images through the haze. The crowd's roar became a distant thing, secondary to the wet sound of breath and the metallic kiss of colliding weapons. Combat psychologists note that duelists often develop micro-expressions before decisive moves. Dax saw it happen. Veer's left eyelid twitched. Sashara read it clean, twisting under his guard. Her dagger drew a thin red line across his ribs. First blood. The crowd howled. Veer backhanded her hard enough to send skittering across the deck. Sashara rolled with the impact, coming up spitting blood. Her grin showed all her teeth. Point proven, she panted. Veer touched his side, stared at the crimson smear on his fingers. Not even close. Traditional duels followed predictable patterns, testing strikes, probing defenses. This wasn't traditional. Veer came in like a collapsing starship. Every blow designed to pulp bone. Sashara gave ground, letting him spend rage as currency. Her counterattacks were surgical. A slash to the thigh here, a jab to the shoulder there. Each strike precise enough to wound, not kill. Dax tasted copper. He'd bitten his tongue without noticing. The duel wasn't sport. It wasn't even about him anymore. This was two apex predators settling something ancient in their marrow. Then it happened. Veer overextended. Just for a half second, but that's all warriors like Sashara needed. Her dagger flickered out, once to his weapon arm, twice to his leading leg. Veer staggered. The crowd noise peaked as Sashara's follow-up kick sent him crashing into a support pillar. Silence. Veer didn't get up. Sashara stood breathing hard, blood trickling from her nose. The dagger in her hand trembled slightly, the only sign of exhaustion. Across the bay, medics hauled Veer upright. He spat something in Askari that made his own attendants wince. Then Sashara turned, found Dax in the crowd. Her eyes burned with something more than victory. Cultural anthropologists write volumes about claimed mate rituals. The theory never captures the reality. Dax's throat going dry, his stomach dropping like a failed grav generator. Sashara hadn't just won a duel. She'd rewritten his future with sharp steel and sheer stubbornness. The crowd noise faded into white noise. Someone handed Sashara a cloth to wipe her face. She ignored it, walking straight for the railing where Dax stood paralyzed. Up close, she smelled like ozone and copper. 3 trials, she rasped. Blood flecked her teeth. Completed, Dax swallowed. His voice came out thin. You could have died, Sashara tilted her head. Probability stood at 18%, then softer. Acceptable risk. The cargo bay lights flickered again. Somewhere behind them, bookmakers argued payout calculations. Dax became acutely aware of the 200 strangers watching this exchange with undisguised fascination. So that's it? He gestured at Veer being half carried away. Fight your boss, check some boxes, now we're married? Sashara blinked, two slow reptilian motions. By Askari law, yes. Studies on cross-cultural unions emphasize communication breakdowns around legalities versus romance. Dax rubbed his temples. His grease-stained coveralls suddenly felt absurd next to her bloodied combat fatigues. Human marriages don't work like that. Explain. Dax glanced at Snuffles, who had somehow acquired a spectator's popcorn and was dissolving it into quantum foam. There's usually dating first. Conversations that don't involve life-threatening trials. Sashara frowned. Blood dripped off her chin onto the deck. This is inefficient. Yeah, well? Dax exhaled sharply. Welcome to humanity. For half a second he thought she might haul him over the railing. Instead, Sashara's shoulders relaxed fractionally. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing red across her cheekbones. A compromise, she announced. The cargo bay held its breath. One human-style date, Sashara continued. Then we revisit Askari marital law. Someone in the crowd whistled. Snuffles made a noise like a malfunctioning airlock. Dax opened his mouth, closed it, then finally managed. Deal. Sashara nodded once. Then her knees buckled. Dax lunged without thinking, catching her before she hit the deck. Up close, the damage was worse. Split lip, bruised ribs, one eye swelling shut. She weighed more than expected, muscle and stubbornness condensed into humanoid form. Medic, Dax barked. No one moved. He scowled at the gawking crowd. She just won your damn duel, some help here. Later, he'd remember how her fingers curled into his sleeve as the medics arrived. How she refused sedation until certain he wouldn't leave. But for now, there was just the weight in his arms and the sharp metallic smell of victory. The betting kiosks flashed updated odds behind them. New wagers appeared. How long until the human cracked? Whether Sashara's injuries would heal before their date? What constituted human courtship rituals anyway? Dax ignored them all. The duel was over. The real challenge was just beginning. The rusted wrench smelled like recycled air and regret when Dax returned. His usual corner booth now had an invisible force field around it. Not the energy kind, the social kind. Conversations stopped when he entered. Whispered ones started when he passed. The spot between his shoulder blades itched with the weight of 200 staring eyes. Your usual walker? Reisner didn't quite meet his gaze when pouring the synth whiskey. The glass slid across the counter with more care than usual, like handling explosives. Dax downed it in one swallow. The burn barely registered. Survivors of sudden celebrity report similar disorientation. One day you're nobody, the next you can't piss without an audience. At least 3 betting pools were running about his love life. Jorgo from Dock 7 had the best odds on him lasting a month before fleeing. Not that anyone said it to his face. Across the bar, 2 mechanics abruptly stopped talking when he looked over. One made an Askari hand gesture Dax didn't recognize but suspected meant property of. You could lean into it, Tarn suggested, sliding into the adjacent stool. His grin looked more predatory than usual. We're charging 5 credits a head for Q&A sessions in the back. Dax crushed the disposable glass in his fist. The sound made nearby patrons flinch. Psychological studies on coerced life changes show a predictable trajectory: denial, panic, bargaining. Dax hovered somewhere between stages 2 and 3, with occasional flashes of dissociative acceptance. He kept replaying Sashara's last words before medics took her away. 3 trials completed like that settled everything. What's she like? A junior engineer Dax barely recognized hovered at his elbow. The kid's datapad was open to a fresh notes page. When she's not, you know. Conquering warlords? Dax stared until the engineer retreated. The station's reaction wasn't just gossip, it was recategorization. Doc Manifest now listed him as Walker D. Askari claimed. The maintenance crew gave him a wider berth in the corridors. Even his bunk assignments upgraded mysteriously. Yesterday, a crate of Askari nutrient paste arrived at his quarters with no return address. The accompanying note simply read, "For stamina." They're scared of her, Tarn observed, watching 3 miners vacate the nearest table. Which means they're scared of you by association. Could be useful. Dax rubbed his temples where a headache pulsed in time with the station's faulty life support. Human social dynamics didn't prepare you for suddenly becoming the romantic equivalent of a captured war trophy. Cognitive dissonance theory explains why forced role adoption causes such distress. The mind rebels against identities thrust upon it. Every glance in the rusted wrench pressed the new reality. The diner's neon sign flickered like a dying star. Dax adjusted his jacket for the 5th time in as many minutes. Across the booth, Sashara sat motionless, her posture so rigid the seat's synth leather didn't even creak. A date then, she'd said that morning in the med bay, like granting a prisoner last meal privileges. Now, under the harsh glow of the diner's overheads, her injuries stood out starkly, the fading bruise along her jawline, the freshly knit scar on her right temple. Even out of armor, she looked like she could dismantle the table with her bare hands. Human courtship requires sustenance, Sashara announced. She eyed the laminated menu like it might contain troop movements. This is logical, Dax rubbed his temples. Behind the counter, 2 line cooks peered through the service window, spatulas frozen mid-flip. Relationship studies confirm that successful cross-cultural interaction relies on mutual concession. Sashara had traded ritual combat for a laminated menu, progress of a sort. The waitress approached with the caution of someone defusing explosives. What'll it be? Her gaze kept darting to Sashara's scars. Double cheeseburger, Dax said. Extra fries. Sashara studied the menu another 3 seconds before flipping it over twice. Explain milkshake. Next booth over, a cargo hauler choked on his coffee. His companion made the sign against evil. The diner's ambient chatter had dropped to whispers the moment they'd walked in. Cross-species research demonstrates that breaking bread together chemically reduces threat perception. Assuming both parties understood what bread was, Dax gestured at the menu. It's sweet, frozen, you'll like it. Sashara's eyes narrowed. Nutritional value? 0, she nodded once. 2. The waitress retreated hastily. Cutlery rattled in her tray. So, Dax said, small talk with an alien warrior felt about as natural as petting an active landmine. You always go straight to marriage proposals? Sashara's fingers tapped a rhythmless pattern on the tabletop. Each tap left a faint indentation in the cheap polymer. Efficiency is virtue. Your genome screening took 6 months. Dax's coffee paused halfway to his lips. Wait, you scanned my DNA? Among other metrics. Sashara produced a data chip from her pocket. Civilian clothes didn't suit her. She looked like a vibroblade wrapped in flannel, and projected his medical records above the table. Respiratory efficiency above median, muscle density within acceptable parameters. Cognitive flexibility scored highest. The couple at the next booth openly gawked. The projection highlighted Dax's last colonoscopy in glowing detail. You could have just asked me out for drinks, Dax muttered, swiping the display away. Sashara blinked. Alcohol impairs decision-making. Psych studies suggest humor is humanity's first defense against discomfort. Dax leaned forward. That's kind of the point. Their food arrived with unnecessary haste. The waitress barely let the plates touch the table before fleeing. Sashara dissected her milkshake with analytical precision, swirling the straw like testing for poison. Dax took a savage bite of his burger. So what now? More trials? Knife fights? Observation period. Sashara licked melted ice cream off the straw with reptilian efficiency. Several nearby diners shuddered. Assessing long-term compatibility. That what this is? Dax gestured between them. The ketchup bottle trembled under his grip. Sashara's pupils dilated slightly, the only tell she had when amused. Pass-fail criteria remain classified. Cosmopolitan xenopsychologists argue successful interspecies romance requires identifying shared values beyond mere survival. Watching Sashara annihilate a chocolate milkshake with military focus, Dax wondered if their only common ground was caloric appreciation. Then the holoscreen above the counter flickered to life with a slapstick comedy rerun. Sashara's head snapped up so fast several patrons flinched. Explain the comedic value, she demanded, pointing at the screen where a man slipped on a banana peel. Dax chewed slowly. It's funny because he fell. Sashara watched the next gag, a pie to the face, with the intensity of a tactical analyst. Halfway through the third skit, her sternum made a weird clicking noise. It took Dax 3 beats to realize she was laughing. Ascari laughter sounded like a knife sharpener getting intimate with a power drill. Every glass on the table vibrated. The couple behind them paid their bill hastily, something unclenched in Dax's chest. Here finally was something human she understood. I enjoy this human ritual, Sashara declared as the credits rolled. Her milkshake glass stood empty, scraped clean. The diner's front window shattered. Snuffles oozed through the broken pane like living quicksilver, his violet eyes scanning for threats. Several customers fled outright. The remaining ones pressed themselves against the far wall. Dax sighed. Thought we agreed on no chaperones. Sashara didn't look up as Snuffles coiled around their booth. Security protocol. The void beast chirped and extruded a pseudopod onto the table, depositing a crudely folded napkin. Dax smoothed it out to reveal a child's crayon drawing of their diner table, complete with stick figure Sashara and a blob, presumably representing himself. Malix, spawn. The cook called from the kitchen. She's been feeding that thing since you sat down. Snuffles vibrated proudly. Sashara examined the artwork with clinical detachment, then handed it back. Acceptable reconnaissance work. Interspecies research confirms that shared activities build rapport faster than formal interviews. Dax hadn't planned on classifying watching bad comedy with a Death World warrior and her extra-dimensional pet as a bonding experience. Yet here they were. Sashara stood abruptly, tossing credits on the table. Exact change, naturally. Next courting ritual? Dax blinked up at her. There's more? Human romantic literature suggests multiple dates are customary. She said it like quoting field manuals. Tomorrow, 1900 hours. The remains of Dax's burger sat forgotten. Somewhere between the milkshake and Snuffles' art display, the tension had bled out of the room. The remaining diners watched with wary fascination as Sashara strode toward the exit, void beast in tow. At the door, she paused. Your choice of venue next time, human. Then softer. Perhaps more falling humans. Then she was gone, leaving broken glass and bewildered silence in her wake. The neon sign's reflection wobbled in a puddle of spilled soda. Dax realized he was smiling. The waitress crept over with a fresh coffee pot. She seems nice? Dax considered the wreckage, shattered window, traumatized patrons, the unsettling crayon artwork still in his hand. On the holoscreen, another comedian took a pie to the face. Yeah, he said, reaching for the sugar. She's something. Somewhere out there in the station's labyrinthine corridors, an alien warrior was learning about human dating customs. Tomorrow's date was already inevitable, for the first time since this insanity began. The thought didn't fill him with dread. He left a generous tip. The light above their diner booth fizzled intermittently, casting Sashara's sharp features in erratic shadows. A half-eaten synthetic steak sat abandoned on her plate, the fork still precisely angled in her grip. She wasn't eating. She was watching. Not Dax, not the crumbling ceiling tiles, but the small holoscreen mounted near the kitchen doors. It currently played a grainy slapstick reel of a man slipping on a banana peel for the third time in a row. Dax cleared his throat. You're into this stuff? Sashara didn't blink as the comedic sound effects crackled from the diner's bad speakers. Human physical comedy contradicts basic motor coordination studies, she observed. Falling is statistically avoidable. The man on screen took another pratfall. Sashara's sternum made that clicking noise again. It took Dax a second to recognize it as laughter. Studies on humor as a bonding mechanism show that shared laughter releases oxytocin faster than forced small talk. The Askari warrior sitting across from him, who had dueled warlords and tamed void beasts, found banana peel accidents hysterical. Watch this one. Dax pulled up a classic clip on his wrist pad. Two men in tuxedos flung pies at each other with ridiculous precision. Sashara leaned in, her pupils dilating slightly. Ceremonial food waste? Yep. The first pie hit its mark with a wet splat. Sashara's fingers twitched toward her absent weapons, a reflex, then relaxed. By the third pastry collision, her rigid posture eased by nearly 2 degrees. Explain the cultural context, she demanded, as custard dripped down the screen. Dax shrugged. No context. Just funny. Sashara processed this for 3 full seconds, her food forgotten. The holoscreen's glow caught the fading bruises along her jaw. She looked less like a combat automaton now, more like someone who might actually enjoy terrible comedy videos between intergalactic conquests. Psychological research confirms that discovering unexpected commonalities accelerates emotional connections. Dax wasn't sure what qualified as emotional between an unwilling human and an alien who'd essentially marriage proposed via trial by combat, but Watching Sashara analyze slapstick with military precision was something. Snuffles chose that moment to ooze. Through the floor vent, the void beast materialized under their table with a sound like folding space-time. His violet eyes glowed faintly in the diner's dim lighting as he inspected Dax's abandoned fries. "No," Sashara said without looking down. Snuffles retracted his pseudopod with an offended ripple. Dax tossed him a fry anyway. The beast caught it mid-air by briefly existing in. The realization crept up on Dax like a slow engine leak, barely noticeable until suddenly critical. He was elbow-deep in a malfunctioning impulse drive when it hit him. He hadn't checked the news feeds for warlord activity in 3 days. The old Dax, the one who'd measure thruster calibrations 5 times before lunch, would have found that unthinkable. The garage smelled like burnt wiring and stale coolant. His favorite wrench, the one with the chipped handle, lay abandoned on the workbench. 3 weeks ago, that wrench had been his most reliable relationship. Now its grip was gathering dust while he waited for a certain Askari warrior to finish her shift in the weapons range. Psychological studies confirm life-changing transitions often happen incrementally. The day Sashara had walked into the rusted wrench felt like yesterday. The fact that he now knew her preferred calf blend, dark, roast with precisely 17 grams of synthetic sweetener, felt like something out of an alternate timeline. Dax wiped his hands, on a rag that hadn't been clean in weeks. The reflection in the coolant tank showed a face both familiar and strange. Same grease streaks, same tired eyes, but the set of his mouth had changed. The corners didn't drag downward anymore. "Walker?" Tarn's voice echoed from the corridor. "Your girlfriend's pet is eating station property again." The void beast in question currently had half a diagnostic console protruding from its ever-shifting mass. Snuffles chirped at Dax, then phased fully into the bulkhead with his prize. The repair order pinned to the wall listed void beast. Interference under causality for the first time in Port Osiris. History. Research on emotional resilience suggests that humans adapt to even the most absurd circumstances given sufficient exposure. 6 weeks ago, Dax would have had a panic attack at the concept of an extra-dimensional roommate. Now he just sighed and made a note to requisition. A chew toy rated for neutron-rich materials. The Yor station's PA system crackled, with an alert about docking bay depressurization, likely. Sashara testing another of her minor modifications to the stolen warlord flagship. The ship technically belonged to them both now, according to Askari marital law. Dax still couldn't look at its knife-like silhouette without his stomach doing strange maneuvers. Tarn leaned against the workbench with the air of someone enjoying a private joke. "You realize this makes you basically a warlord consort now, right?" Dax flicked a bolt at him. It pinged off Tarn's chest plate. "Seriously," Tarn continued, dodging the next projectile. "You've got your own dedicated berth in high-security docks. The quartermaster greases your requisition forms. Even Yorgo bows now, you've seen it." Dax slid out from under the engine block. His hair was full of synthetic lubricant. 3 months ago, he'd have washed it immediately. Today, he had somewhere to be. Xenocultural scholars note that interspecies relationships often create hybrid behavior patterns. The old Dax would have recoiled at the thought of meeting someone at the firing range. The current version paused only to wipe his fingerprints off a plasma torch before heading out. Sashara stood in Bay 12 recalibrating her sidearm when he arrived. Sunlight from the observation windows striped her armor in gold and shadow. Askari didn't believe in safety goggles. Their inner eyelids were semi-transparent reactive shielding. She fired 3 rounds without blinking. The targets disintegrated in perfect sequence. "You're late," she observed without turning. Dax checked his wristpad. "By 16 seconds. 17. Sashara holstered her weapon with that unsettling precision of hers. "Compensate tomorrow." The first week, her military punctuality had been unbearable. The second week, he'd started setting his chrono 5 minutes early just to avoid commentary. Now he found himself automatically syncing to her rhythms, not out of fear, but because it meant fewer sarcastic remarks over dinner. Psychologists call this predictive alignment, where partners subconsciously adapt behaviors to reduce friction. Dax called it self-preservation. Snuffles agreed, manifesting halfway through their walk to wrap around Dax's ankles like a possessive house cat. The void beast smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet, probably more stolen pastries from the mess hall. "Combat drills completed," Sashara announced as they walked. "Efficiency improved 3.2%. She handed him a data chip. Your biomechanical readings from yesterday's session. Dax pocketed it without checking. The first time she'd done this, he'd expected some brutal training regimen. Turned out a scary courtship involved obsessive health monitoring instead of flowers. Last week's full-spectrum nutrient injection still itched. We have reservations at 1900, Sashara continued. New establishment in the tourist district. Dax blinked. Since when do you make reservations? Human Dating Protocol subsection 4.1. She said it like reciting fleet regulations. Proper planning demonstrates investment. The data chip in Dax's pocket suddenly felt heavier, somewhere between stealing battleships and analyzing bad comedy sketches. Sashara had started reading human relationship guides. Dax tried to picture her scrolling through 10 romantic gestures your partner will love articles, and nearly tripped over a floor seam. Snuffles caught him with a pseudopod before he could faceplant. The beast rumbled approvingly. Studies show that meaningful behavioral changes often manifest in small mundane choices. The fact that Dax now carried spare plasma cartridges in his toolkit just in case spoke volumes. That he'd started enjoying their evening marksmanship sessions said more. And the way his pulse kicked up when Sashara removed her helmet after drills, that particular data point required no scientific analysis. The mess hall smelled like recycled protein and yesterday's regret. Their usual table had developed an invisible force field, not the energy kind, the social kind. Crew members gave them a wide berth, except for the occasional brave soul delivering reports to Sashara. Today's dispatch included a security update and something spherical that Snuffles immediately absorbed with a happy burble. You're smiling, Sashara noted between calculated bites of nutrient paste. Dax hadn't realized. The observation made him immediately stop. Sashara's eyes narrowed. 93% probability, positive emotional response to current circumstances. That a fancy way of asking if I'm happy? Sashara set down her utensils with surgical precision. Clarify, the old Dax would have dodged. The current version met her gaze straight on. Yeah, I think I am. The station's ambient noise seemed to drop several decibels. Somewhere behind them, a tray clattered to the floor. Snuffles warbled approvingly. Sashara absorbed this with the intensity of someone decrypting battle codes. Her fingers twitched toward her wrist display before she caught herself. No biometric scans this time. Just an honest-to-stars conversation. Void Beast acquisition has improved morale 42%, she announced after precisely 8 seconds of silence. Dax barked a laugh. Trust Sashara to credit an eldritch horror for their relationship progress. Yes, Snuffles is a real romantic. Additional contributing factors may exist. Like what? Sashara's armor emitted a soft pulse of light, her version of a tell. 87% likelihood. Shared weapon maintenance rituals. Dax nearly choked on his calf. The Ascari equivalent of candlelit dinners apparently involved cleaning railguns together. He should have been horrified. Instead, he found himself mentally cataloging their tool inventory for tomorrow's session. Neuroscience suggests that genuine happiness often announces itself quietly in unguarded moments. Walking back to their quarters, Dax caught himself humming. Snuffles phased in and out of bulkheads alongside them, occasionally depositing stolen items into Dax's pockets. A spare coil, someone's lunch voucher, what might have been a severed comm relay. Sashara activated the door panel with her biometrics. The upgraded quarters still bore traces of their uneasy truce from early days. His tool racks next to her weapon mounts, civilian laundry mixed with combat webbing. Somewhere along the line, the careful separation had blurred into comfortable coexistence. You require 7.2 hours of sleep for optimal function, Sashara announced, already pulling up tomorrow's schedule on her display. We depart for the tourist district at 1845. The old Dax would have bristled at the regimentation. The current version just nodded, already anticipating whatever bizarre fusion of human dating and Ascari protocol awaited them. As sleep cycle approached, Snuffles sprawled across the foot of the bed in his preferred configuration, roughly 70% in this dimension, the rest presumably off causing chaos elsewhere. Sashara's armor stood sentinel in the corner, its glyphs dark but watchful. Somewhere in the station's depths, the stolen flagship waited, legal-ish salvage now, according to 5 different forged documents. Dax checked the chrono, still 12 minutes before lights out by Sashara's meticulous schedule. He considered the maintenance reports waiting on his pad, The backlog of personal messages. The small mountain of tasks that used to consume his every waking hour. He closed the files unread and powered down the display instead. The future stretched ahead like an uncharted vector, risky, absurd, and improbably bright. Across the room, Sashara's breathing evened into sleep rhythms. Snuffles purred in frequencies that made the furniture vibrate. The station's ancient life support hummed its familiar lullaby. Dax Walker, mechanic, consort, unlikely romantic lead, closed his eyes. Dax Walker never signed up for this. A mechanic who wanted nothing more than greasy engines and quiet nights at the Rusted Wrench, now owns half a stolen Warlord flagship and sleeps with a void beast at the foot of his bed. His fingerprints are on plasma torches instead of thruster coils. His schedule synced to an alien warrior's combat drills. So here's the real question. If an Askari warrior crashed into your life tomorrow, trials blazing, what would you do? Run, fight, or let yourself be won? Because Dax's story isn't ending. It's just warming up its engines.